All right, so it's 7:35. We have quorum, so we're open as a meeting. So couple agenda points today. Number one, the big one, Eric will take us through schools, an analysis and then a recommendation on the FY 26 budget. And then we have a few meeting minutes to get through. We're gonna have to figure out how with the broken TV. Maybe we can share on Zoom or we'll figure that out when we get there. So with that, if the analysis and recommendation was posted in the box early this morning, so if you had a chance to look at it, but I'll turn it over to Eric and we could just have a conversation about it.
Yeah, so let's see. We'll start with the first issue that I have, which is the data issue. So
You wanna?
yeah,
Yeah.
I'll just try to go through this since we don't have a time. First issue that I have is the school committee voted for their budget on March 20th, but the budget that they voted for does not match that which has been publicly posted, provided, and then stated as the budget. So what I mean by that is on March 20th, they voted for a budget of $70,870,718 and a FTE count of 637.38. But what they're claiming, stating was the actual budget is the same amount, but the FTEs are different. The FTEs are 635.38. So, if you have either a professional football team or a bunch of employees, that changes your cost per employee. There's not enough clarity, in my opinion, on how they change the FTEs. It's apparent that there's an increase in administration director positions. There's reduction in various teaching positions, but every single school sees a reduction on the teacher side, or you'll see some of the data.
It's not a reallocation thing as far as you're aware.
The central office.
No.
Yeah.
No, it's not. So that's my issue. It's not clear enough because if you look at the central office is still carrying 12 FTEs on both budgets. So there's no change there. There's an increase in the admin cost, I can assume, based on the data. And, there's a reduction in certain areas that they discuss. So I'll just go through this pretty quickly. These two slides are this is the budget that they voted on. This is the budget that they put in their Google Drive, which is their budget that they voted on, which is not what they voted on. So the quick summary is difference of two full-time FTEs, no change in budget, but without a clear understanding of what's changed, we can't really calculate the per pupil spending. Personnel service increase is 7.23% or $4.18 million. The proposed other expenses is a 6.57 increase, about $500,000. Now, central office loses one FTE at the director coordinator level, but that doesn't really show up in the budget balance sheet. Again, there's no increase in English teachers. McCall loses a math teacher, which is unclear if that's a retirement or how that's structured. Again, we've asked for clarification on who's retiring.
Yeah, we had two specific questions.
Yes.
It was exact number of retirements and dollar amount, and then FY 25 dollar compensation. Then FY 25 unfilled positions and associated compensation. So we're still pending those questions.
Correct. So again, it's unclear without that clarification. So let's see, where I lost my spot. Yeah, no increase in English teachers. McCall loses a math teacher. McCall English supplies are cut. Lincoln English supplies are cut by 38%. Lynch English supplies are cut 14%. The only increase in reading teachers occurs at Lincoln by 0.1 FTE. So again, without a clear understanding, in my opinion, of what the literacy program is doing, it just seems like it's adding a lot of directors and a lot of foot soldiers. There's no increase in special education teachers. It's only directors and coordinators. But again, the two budgets are technically different.
I think the last few 3 to 4 bullet points might be worth emphasizing in.
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to definitely emphasize that. But part of the motion that I put forward is basically without data that's actually concise and validated by a plan, so to speak. And that's I can't recommend beyond the motion that I will present because there's the town revenues and we'll match that and the circuit breaker funds. But to ask for 7.15% increase while not being clear, concise, and procedural with the amount of proposed FTEs, I'd have to ask that and go back and revote.
I'm just saying that for the town, it might be helpful, informative to town meeting members if the survey that they presented had staffing shortage, literacy as the #1 priority. And in their budget, it wasn't increasing the teachers or the staff, it was increasing the director level.
Yeah,
Well, you have that here in the next bullet, though, no increase in English teachers, losing
Yeah.
a math
Yeah.
teacher. Might want to make that bullet just so it's easy.
Yeah. that for town meeting, I absolutely will.
Yeah, this isn't us, we'll write the
This
budget
is for
book when we get
us.
there. Like now it's just a conversation of the best data we have available as of 4/1 and just seeing,
The best data that we have available as a 4-1, in my opinion,
Yeah.
is unclear data.
But there's
That's
no
not really
contradiction then in terms of the headcount not increasing on the literacy side, because I think they said they're gonna do a pilot, right? So it's not necessarily.
It's not necessarily that, it's just how it's showing up in the budget,
Got it.
and my question is,
It's the second. Oh, sorry. Nice.
so that's what I want clarification on more than anything else. I mean, again, 2 FTEs can easily be $100,000 or $440,000, so. I just don't see how you can adjust that math on this workbook, and that doesn't change the overall financial value. Because there's something not right in that model with how it's distributed across teachers. It's almost arbitrary. Or across the schools, I should say. So yeah, again, there's an increase in administration relatively more severe than that of teaching staff, literacy and mathematics professionals. There's a 20% increase in superintendency FTE. It's overall a budget that does not focus on teachers and materials, and the numbers validate that statement. So.
They haven't shared their financial model with us.
No.
Did they ever do that in the past?
no, in FY21, depends on what we mean by model. FY20, we had that summary sheet.
Yeah.
So no, we did not get that summary sheet of like, hey, here are the 7 variables and here are how the variables change year over year. So we asked for that. We don't have it.
You're talking about that FY21.
Yeah. Yeah, so it had like all the different variables laid out, but I think, thank you.
I mean, again, not to beat a dead horse, but if you follow the proper protocol from a state level, there's some issues that I have with the budget, which is what they voted on is not what was technically presented. This data does not, it's not aligned. What they voted on, this one sheet that was presented and presented to us with 637.38 FTEs is not what they put in their Google Drive on Monday, which they state is their budget. And then I went to review all their meeting minutes. They've been arrears for a while, so it's just very hard to, from a personal, professional opinion, it's very hard to support data that doesn't seem correct. So I've got no issue with them going back and validating their data, but I just see some glaring issues that I can't support other than at a, revenue increase, pull the circuit breaker money forward and whatever they can find to support their programs. Of course, that's approved, but to ask the town to dip into free cash without a valid justification for this, I just can't support it. So.
Yeah.
With that said, I can make a motion.
Jeff,
Yeah.
can I ask a couple questions of Eric?
Yeah, so we have Jerry and then Catherine. Go ahead, Jerry.
Yeah, so the first question is, so the personnel service increase of 7.23%, roughly 4.2 million. Do we know how much of that is contractually obligated? And then the
It's not.
second question is, on the superintendency, the 20% growth in FTE. What are the actual numbers? Are we talking 4 to 5 or, 6 to 8 or?
So we're talking 4 to 5, 20% increase, $144,000 for the superintendency. And with respect to the other numbers, with how they're adding FTEs, I would say that without more supporting data to review, you can't really run those numbers in a technical manner that supports the math. So really, without knowing what those increases are for various teachers' levels, I don't know.
All right, thanks.
And really, when you look into it and you see that math is getting cut in FTE and superintendency director positions are increasing, I would argue that, the teachers union isn't negotiating that, but I don't know. So I suppose that's a question we should go back to the school committee for.
And Catherine, I got a question. I think procedurally, if we get to a vote today, great. But I think we still have to, our responsibility, we still have to follow up with these questions as best we can.
Yeah, and I'm fine with not voting, with voting, whatever.
Oh, yeah, I think we have to vote like we're in April 1st, I think we have to, proceed with our process. But that doesn't mean we shouldn't stop asking the questions of like, here's what's outstanding, because they're meaningful.
I would like to go to a vote just because I would like to vote on math that's supported by the revenues of the town.
Yeah.
And anything beyond that, I have no issue reopening a vote. I think that's totally fair, respectful, and appropriate. I just don't think that from a financial side, you can carte blanche approve the 7.15% increase. That's gonna hit free cash.
Go ahead.
Just for clarification, so the last budget that we looked at was the budget for March 20th. That was the $70 million.
That was
Has there been another iteration?
So there's been an iteration. The FTE count is different, but the overall fiscal numerical value is
the
exactly.
It's
dollar.
still $70 million.
Yes.
This is the different, okay.
But
So-
that's my issue in itself, because if you fire two,
Then you
if
get-
you remove two people, the number should change from that.
So on the budget that they reviewed last week, there were, this doesn't answer the entire question, but two of the FTE, the full-time individuals were special ed teachers. So.
Yeah, and I think that I think that's Eric's point of what, that packet right there, I don't view as a budget of,
I agree.
so, yeah, but I think that was the intent, yeah.
That's one of my concerns, is that what has been said doesn't necessarily match the spreadsheet. And
Mhm.
again, there are some positions that are delineated in a manner that doesn't support what was presented on the 20th and at our follow meeting on the 25th.
All right, go ahead, Rich, and then if you're prepared, make a motion, and we could debate this,
Okay,
yeah, as much as we want.
yeah, Eric, and I went through the one-page summary, which I'm gonna refer to as the school committee's recommended budget version B. And just to figure out, satisfy myself as to where the FTEs and the money was going. So it's interesting, the 5 elementaries are losing 0.4 FTEs.
Yes.
But there's no change in the personnel budget. But then if you look
Yeah.
at the proposed other expenses, they all go up by $80,000.
Yeah, that's one of my concerns with this
Is that
budget.
substitutes or some of the contract positions then?
No, to other expenses,
It's other expenses,
Yeah.
photocopy,
I see.
whatever.
but there are callouts for photocopy paper and other elements like that, which are.
I mean, all I have, I don't know where it is. All I have is this. And there's all the, in the other one.
Central office gets $14,000 for office
Changes.
supplies, so technically it shouldn't be
Well, so-
other expenses. Technically, it should be in that.
And
budget.
it's. So those equal out. The McCall is losing.
A math teacher.
And I don't know, but.
It's a math teacher, so they're losing one.
And they're
FTE
losing
in the
one
math.
FTE.
Yeah.
And that money,
So for your example,
that shows up again as a new FTE in pupil services. They
Yes.
basically took the $113,735.19 that they got from removing the FTE from the call to fund the new FTE in pupil services.
yes, so for McCall Middle School, by their most updated, their Red B document, math teachers minus one FTE. There's a minus 0.4 FTE on the educator support professional position and a minus 0.2 on the computer ed teachers. There's an increase on the director coordinator of 1.75. There's an increase of 2 of unspecified additions. So your total FTE change on the McCall side alone is 2.75. But again, part of my issue is we've got a different FTE number between the two budgets, and then they're asking for unspecified additions totaling $283,855.30. That's just at one school. Quickly, this can spiral into $1 million issue. So,
All right,
And
does anybody want to make a motion?
yes, I would.
Is this not the most recent one?
yeah, it was, I guess.
This is the most recent one, if you want to look at it. It's not all highlighted, but basically,
And this has all the detail that they had specified previously behind it?
this is all the detail that they did not previously specify. It was detailed in the preliminary budget, but it was not detailed in the budget that was voted on March 20th.
That's what I'm asking. So we got
There's
the
no-
detailed budget
there's-
before. Has that been updated Seems-
this is what I'm saying. This is where it gets
Oh.
ridiculous, in my opinion, which was they voted on a budget, which is a one sheet budget. The numbers did not add up correctly somehow, some way. And then what they're claiming now is the budget is what you have in your hand.
So this is out the window, the original. one.
As far as I'm concerned, yes, because you've got the wrong FTE count, so you can't procedurally do that.
Yeah.
So I would like a motion to move to increase school FY 26 by 3.87% with a recommendation of the school committee to utilize the circuit breaker funds, clearly separate one-time costs and seek alternative funding for any programs that allow.
And that 3.8%, just before we second, wish we second first and then ask the question, sorry.
Yeah, you can second, then we could have a dialogue about it.
Second.
So second by the piece.
That 3.87 represents a zero, draw on operating reserves.
No, so that 3.87 is what we talked about is our adjusted revenue growth year over year.
That's right.
So after we made our adjustments, not counting the right side of that paper with all like the intercompany equivalents, just property tax, state, local receipts. So even I think with that dollar amount, we're still tapping into free cash for between, I think, $1.5 million to $2 million.
Assuming they're taking the circuit breaker as we expect.
Yeah, and I think that's part of the recommendation. So I think when we ran, there's at least $2 million of float there. And that's equivalent to 3-ish% of the budget. So, we can't dictate that, but we're strongly recommending look at that. Just like we took from the health stabilization fund, just like select board did health insurance policy differences, like if we have that ability to utilize it.
Did we find out, so for fiscal year 2025, how did they use the 2 million or so in circuit breaker funds that have been provided the previous year?
So there's a whole list of eligible expenses where I might ask for Milan's help of those funds are exhausted, but they're spent in arrears. So somewhere along the line years ago, there was a determination made to sit on or save 1 year's worth of those funds and then spend the next year's.
Right.
Is that we in agreement on that?
Yeah,
statement?
so from what I understand, the money that we're spending, that we're gonna be projecting to spend in fiscal year 26 from circuit breaker is the money that we were reimbursed last year.
So
And the money that we're being allocated this year, which we get paid on a quarterly basis, we're basically banking to spend next year.
So for FY 25, for example, our transportation reimbursement at 44% was $285,522. Our total reimbursement was $2.4 million, 2.444001 paid, as you said, quarterly, 601,000 per quarter. So my assumption would be that we would get at least that from the state, even though these are very interesting times and the state's kind of warning that who knows. But you could assume that it's going to be at least that much. Other towns are assuming that their increase will be 400,000-ish.
And
So-
it's a known number now too.
Yeah.
We know what we're being allocated for next year. We know exactly what those quarterly payments are gonna be. And from what I understand, in previous years, Winchester used to use the current year allocation for the current year budget. That
Right.
changed somewhere along the way. Other towns still treat it this way, where they use the current year allocation for the current year budget. The way we're doing it now is the most conservative. Gives you the most cushion. But obviously in a year like this, where there's a big budget deficit that's being driven by this group's budget request, it's a reasonable, I think it's a reasonable ask them to consider using that the way they used to and the way that other towns do right now.
Well, I guess I completely agree. Like my question is partly what were they accounting for that off the books in previous years? Like were they have a $2.5 million slush fund or $2 million slush fund that they were not asking for money
I
for?
wouldn't say I think it's spending ability since it's a reimbursement.
So if you
So-
follow the Massachusetts regulations on how they have to account for that, they have to account for that money in their budget. But they don't necessarily have to delineate between using it in arrears or essentially real time.
Right now, we're carrying over on a yearly basis the maximum that's allowed by the state.
But it like, so for last year's, when we proposed a budget last year. Did we factor in the fact that they were gonna have $2 million circuit breaker funding to spend from the previous year? Right, I mean, look, there's $2 million every year being spent.
I think they factor it into their budget as a reimbursement,
Okay,
but the reimbursement that's assumed in the budget is the one that was received from the previous year, from what I understand.
okay,
But it's considered an income source, right? And has to be,
Well,
It's an offset to special ed costs.
but it is factored into the calculation.
I believe so. We need to check in if it's in there, but it should be.
we need
So
to
is
check,
this
but
the
you also have to
spirit-
figure out how you spend that money. So if you're focusing on, you know, you have an $800,000 overall impact of your special ed transportation cost, and you can assume that 44% is going to be covered by the state, then it seems logical to me to use free cash or any other alternative to cover that potential one-time impact on your special ed transportation. But I would want to see that called out clearly, and I would want the town meeting members to vote for that in a manner that supports
Is
that.
the spirit of your question whether there's this perpetual $2 million in the budget sort of at the bottom that just gets rolled over?
I guess my concern, and not, I mean, not that I'm concerned on their behalf, but my concern is if they've been using $2 million to pay off something, whether it's special ed or other things, and then budgeting for all of that, and they're asking for a $70.8 million budget, assuming that they're actually gonna spend $72.8 million or $73 million,
Yeah.
because they've assumed that they're gonna have access to this money, because otherwise it would have been accumulating, right? And there'd be a bank account accumulating $2 million every year. Unless it's something that we have been factoring in as a budget line item every year, they have this revenue, you know, but to me, I could see a one-time thing where they both used 2024s during 2025, and then they will use 2025s during 2026 and 2026 during 2026. And if we combine those 2 years, that's effectively what we're doing.
It is.
Yeah.
So if that's the case, then yeah, they're gonna be technically 2 million short the next year because we're topping them up
Yeah,
for a number that's not gonna be there the next year because they're not gonna be able to kind of combine both years in 1 year again. I think that would be probably part of a larger strategy as we're getting the state of the town together and
Yeah.
talking about an override. That's probably a good opportunity to talk about what their strategy is with that, and if they want to go back to the way they've been doing it previously, which is more conservative. But I think for this specific year and the difficulty the town is in from a deficit perspective, I think it's at least worth exploring. I don't know if they've talked about it as a committee. I don't think they have in a meeting. But I think it's worth spurring that conversation to take place.
And I mean, like, go ahead.
I just want to give everyone perspective. I dug in a little bit, back to 2020. And at the end of every year, the comptroller produces a report and it tells you how much is in circuit breaker at the end of that year. So, the fall town meeting, I want to make sure I'm telling you the correct year. Fall town meeting 21, which means it represents at the end of FY 20, you had 849,692. And then if you look at the end of 24, it's 1.849. So in between, there were other years here. It's like it went to in 23. Sorry, so let me just start from 20, just to give you some perspective. In 20, it was 849. 21, it was 994. I'm just kind of giving you round numbers. 22, it was 1.246. You see that increasing, right?
Yeah.
And then 23, it was 1.8. And then 24 is 1.8. So it's 1.849. So if you start at 20 to 24. There's $1 million that's extra somewhere along the way. They didn't need it, so now there's a net million at the end of 24. But I asked what the number was in the account right now. We were told 2.2, right?
Yeah,
So you see that increasing circuit breaker money that I think you had a great question. What's been happening across the years with that account?
and was the intention, someone said something about special ed transportation, is that the key?
so from a state level, they break it down into buckets. There's special indicator instruction and tuition, there's special indicator transportation, there's instruction and tuition reimbursement at 75%, which is what we get paid out of. So for FY 25, it was $2.118 million. Then there's transportation reimbursement at 44%. That's $285,000 this year. So the school committee spoke about their rather large increase in special ed transport. So that's one of those indicators where you can assume that the following year, they'll get at least 44% of that back.
Okay,
We'll see.
yeah,
I mean,
interesting.
and the total, again, the total's 2.404 for FY25. My question based on the timing of that is why is the account at 2.2? Because it's either supposed to be 2.118 or it's supposed to be 2.40, technically 2.404, because the final payment for FY25 was on Monday. So
All right.
Another question, is that
Sure.
okay?
Yeah.
Well, when you said that, where McCall lost, or Morocco lost, math teacher?
McCall had an FTE removed, but I don't know if it's, I don't know what the justification for that is. And when I say that, we've asked who's retiring,
Yeah,
but there's been no clarity on that.
removed in comparison with the
The previous year.
preliminary budget for this coming year, or from.
With
compared-
respect to FY25,
So year over year.
year over year.
Yeah,
Oh,
So again, they talk about a services budget, but
Mm.
you have a math teacher leaving, so I don't know how the level is the same.
so, on the.
While the amount of kids in the school system increase.
So at face value, we're saying even though the pitch for the much higher budget was that the literacy math interventionist and the other staffing shortage needing support. And in their actual final budget, that they did not really allocate fund for that support, they allocated fund somewhere else.
I would not be overly negative in the statement. I would just say that there's not a lot of clarity.
Yeah, I
And
think that's
it's
where
a
we are
very administration focused budget and not, I mean, the numbers don't lie. There's no increase in teachers essentially. There's a decrease in a math teacher. There's a decrease in other aspects of this, but there's an increase in superintendency and director coordinator positions. So again, they can focus on, they want to focus on literacy, they want to focus on class size, but this states otherwise.
The math intervention.
That's not part of this. So, I mean, yeah.
Confused because the chart that they showed last week shows a 10% increase in FTE at McCall.
So the chart that they showed last week, which is not technically correct, right, they have to harp on that.
That's one of the mistakes.
It's technically McCall, but again, what you see if you actually break into the McCall budget is they increase the director coordinators by 1.75 FTEs, which I'm assuming are literacy, but again, no real justification for that. They then add 2 unspecified additions. So I don't know what that position is because it's unspecified. And the 2 unspecified positions are at $283,855 total. So, you know, an impact of $141,500 for each employee. That's definitely a good paying job. That's unspecified.
Go
So
ahead,
yeah.
Rich. Oh, sorry. Did you have a question, Jane? Go ahead, Rich.
The unspecified, in terms of the unspecified additions, I thought Andrew told us at the last meeting, those were column changes, they'd identified them. And that was his way of accounting for it.
Well, that's what I'm trying to figure out, because again, they've got the central office. The numbers don't really clearly add up.
Yeah, I know they don't add up.
Because there's an FTE, again. You get a change, but the numbers don't add up to what was voted on versus this.
Okay,
Which is my biggest issue, is that what was voted on is not what's presented here. And the numbers don't add up.
yeah, I think we all agree with that point. And there might be a procedure thing there in the future, but I think it fees to what you mentioned earlier on of the operating reserve impact, free cash impact. If we subtract out the health insurance action taken by the select board, we can recognize that we're looking at about 1.7 million still a draw. So even with 3.87 plus, you know, there is the spending capacity, like a much larger spending capacity, but we're still draining almost $2 million in free cash.
So what's the basis then for the 3.87% rather than a lower? suggestion? It will, Eric, were you just trying to do the maximum you could? with-
Trying to do the maximum that we can to
Right.
support the school system without,
So, but that
Going
implies we're comfortable with
Yes.
pulling from operating reserves.
yes,
Yeah, I
Yeah.
think.
at a
I-
level that protects our bond rating and our overall long
Yeah,
term.
I think if in this, I don't say buying time, but just giving the town time. Like spend $3.5 million in fall town meeting, spend this plus a little bit more in Springtown meeting. You know, $4.5 million, even 3 million. I think those are the types of numbers that can get us in trouble. We're gonna work with Stacy. I'm meeting with Stacy and Beth on the 7th to try to get very specific on what are the trip lines. But I think that was the rationale for just adjusted revenue growth.
What is it, 3.8%?
That-
87%,
87.
put us in terms of the bond rating? What's the percentage?
In terms of,
Is it, we were at 15%, I think, of,
so we have to, I wanna walk through with Stacy and Beth, because they changed the calculation. So if you read the credit opinion, it's no longer X% operating reserve, it's now 20% of this bigger calculation. So I wanna try to get to what that bigger calculation really is to make it real. But we, we should know a little bit more on,
So in terms of our proposal, that's on the table, then is maximum support for the schools. But protecting the bond rating, that sort of is where
With-
we're at.
yeah, I think the message is with the spending ability of
Right.
another $2 million.
Right.
If the schools
Exactly,
decide.
providing a path for
Yeah,
schools
right.
to potentially reach what their target is for this year in growth while limiting the hits to free cash.
I think that's a very positive message.
Yeah, and I,
It buys time, as you said.
buys
It's
a little
buy-
time if
it's
we can
buying time.
mobilize.
So 3.87% increase. Versus a town budget increasing 3.06%,
So
or what the assumption of the 3.6.
so the revenue growth is 3.87%. We'd have to look at the numbers, so the total budget growth. Is the question, what is the total budget growth, assuming 3.87 for the?
Oh, I'm sorry, I thought the 3.87 was a schools increase and,
So no, that's the motion, so just increase school budget by our adjusted revenue growth year over year.
so if we do that, we're still taking
Short,
1.7 million out of.
We're still short, but hopefully by pulling the circuit breaker funds, clearly separating one-time costs, which then we can present, then the town meeting members could see what one-time costs we should fund in a manner from free cash that are purely one-time, and seek alternative funding from the state or
Yeah,
feds.
we're-
for anything else.
we're still gonna, if this is what we recommend, it's still a sizable draw on free cash. So unless we have the appetite to really reduce that 3.87 number, go back to the town municipal side, which is growing at 1.9%, 2.9% with unallocated wages, unless we want to really start tightening there. But I don't know if that's the right thing to recommend to town meeting.
Well, you've got the helpful suggestion, which is what's on the table, and then you've got the one that sticks to we don't ever go beyond the balanced budget.
Yeah.
And that's a much lower growth. And I guess those are the two fundamental options, and
Yeah.
maybe we just put both on the table and then explain why we're supporting one, if we do.
Yeah, and I think that's where, when I prepare the yellow sheet
Yeah.
based on our decisions, procedurally, we have to think about what that means, but. Yeah, if we followed true to our principles, it's X. If, say we got comfortable using free cash that we think we sort of solve issues, it's Y. But yeah, I would just go back to the 13 million underfunding for capital too, so. But I think it's a good recommendation in light of everything we're navigating through,
And also be realistic about what the town's gonna do.
yeah. Go ahead, Rich.
I mean, my concern is the pilot study for the literacy curriculum. I think really I should have a plan of how we might fund that.
Yeah, and I think that goes back to. I don't want us to be prescriptive in how to spend. So it's, if that pilot is deemed rank order number one, before everything else, then spend the money on that. And you have an excess and $2 million in spending ability that you can make that work. I get the point, but I don't want to say, you know, we want to fund this line item, not that line item.
But again, I think to the point of the motion that if you clearly separate one-time costs and that study is a
Yeah.
one-time costs, that's present.
And then
I
put
don't
that
think that's
to, put
an
that
issue.
to town meeting. Yeah,
Yeah.
this is a one-time cost. Here are the intended outcomes. Here's what we're gonna learn.
I mean, if it's a $1 million or $5
Yeah.
million cost, and I'm just being arbitrary with my numbers, I think the town meeting members have to see that and vote on it. I think in that situation, it would probably be more successful for school committee versus the muddied water that we're currently wading, so.
Well, I just,
Good.
I'm uncomfortable about.
Yeah.
Not finding a way to, a clear path to finding them.
I would agree with that.
Good.
So, sorry, I missed the original motion. But, at 3.87, what's the net increase to the school in terms of dollars?
$2,559,000. With an additional $2 million funding ability.
Yeah,
or
yeah.
spending.
Yeah, I think we should emphasize that because I don't want the punchline coming out of this being
That's why I
FinCom
think we
cuts
need
school
to-
budget
Yeah,
without
that's
the
why-
context of circuit breaker.
Yeah, I think there's a, you know, a potential effective growth rate of 5, 6, close to 7%, depending on how people decide, the schools decide to use a circuit breaker. I completely agree. The message is not 3.87 revenue growth. It's, we believe that's the right number for the town. And by the way, we should tap into circuit breakers like we're doing on the municipal side of the town.
And clearly identify one-time costs.
And clearly
bring it to the
identify
town meeting,
one-time
because if you could easily pull out $500,000 to whatever from the one-time costs out of the budget, so this
Yeah.
3.87% still allows for growth. It allows for the circuit breaker fund usage, but if you identify the actual one-time costs, be in a solid standing.
Yeah.
That feels eminently reasonable. I think, as you said, buys time, sticks within the fundamental goals of preserving bond rating and realistic as well.
Yeah, and that dollar amount actually is very close to what they've been asking.
Yeah.
That's the average for the last 4 years is $2.5 million per year.
Yeah,
So the budget has increased $10 million in the past 4 years.
Well, and that's where the real issue is, as that number gets bigger and bigger,
As a, yeah, the
it gets more exponential.
1% is a
Yeah.
lot bigger than next year.
1% of
Back to
100 million.
The point you were making at the beginning, FTEs going up, but enrollments are basically flat
Well,
over the next 5 years.
so part of that discussion that's a little confusing is we've got the enrollment study, which clearly states that in 10 years, we will have a serious increase in students.
well, no,
Years,
the-
not in 5,
I
in
think,
10.
No,
but I don't want to
2030
miss
to
the
2035.
enrollment study.
I know that's what it's 10 years, we'll have 300 plus.
But the
there's no
enrollment study,
actual-
just a point.
Yeah.
The high water mark for the school system, I believe, was in 2016 or 17. And what the enrollment study suggests in 10 years is that we will then be back at the high water mark.
But that's not supposed to kick in until 2030.
Yeah, so I think that,
25 to 30, essentially flat.
yeah, so I think that enrollment, what's going on there, the 2 studies that we've had done in the year, I think they're, when we write the budget book to give the context of like, here's what people said, here's where we think enrollment's going. I think schools said that their number for enrollment was 50 or 4358. If I remember, so,
Yeah. The number just stuck in my head was that 65 new students have come in fact, Andrew, is that his name? Andrew made reference to the fact that there was a spike this year. And my recollection is there was 65 students that came out of the 240Bs. It's like that number. But then it's flat because they don't have any more 40Bs. coming
yeah,
in.
and it's tough when, again, I think this goes back to, it's tough when everything's verbal. And we don't have things written down, like question and answer. So
It was in the budget someplace, the budget document.
so it's the 65 coming from the 40Bs.
And that's part of the challenge is we're referred to, all of our subcommittee meetings are taped, all the documents are here, but there's nothing really tying it together in a package, presenting a summary of what's happening. And
Yeah.
everyone's kind of left to piece it together, which I'm assuming will be resolved once they produce their budget book, but on April 1st, we don't have it and we need to
Yeah, and
discuss things.
I agree. Go ahead, Rich.
Catherine, I have this number, if you can see, I don't have it with me at the top of my head, but
I know I saw it.
Yeah, I think
so.
I can get that.
Follow-up question, does this mean that we do not have a structurally balanced budget this year?
That's the implication,
Mhm.
yeah.
We're dipping into free cash.
I know our principle was to, I appreciate Brian, put the word strive in there. So I think, we're striving to do that, but when we're given a $4.5 million hole, it's, we're trying to balance it all.
Jeff, question?
Sure.
So, as I was looking at these numbers, so, with the 3.87, we're basically taking about 2.166 million away from the schools. But the circuit breaker then covers that delta of 2.166, correct?
Yeah, if the decision was made to utilize all that money, correct.
Then should that not bring us pretty close to being in balance, revenue and expense?
Now, because the circuit breaker is a reimbursement, right?
The money that's in the account now is reimbursement for this year. So, Jerry, don't forget that they're gonna get reimbursed $2.5 million in FY 26 that they can so choose to use in 26 if they want. So really, it doesn't wipe out circuit breaker for 26.
Well, unless the state of Massachusetts gets rid of sales tax, that revenue is pretty predictable.
They've been approved for
Yeah.
that $2.5 million in FY 26.
Yeah.
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 Mhm.
And-
Yeah, that's a known number.
$4.7 million in FY 26,
Got it.
not really 2.2.
Does that answer your question, Jerry?
Yeah, it does. Thank you.
That seems like a good argument for preserving even more unrestricted cash. Because if we're gonna be depleting their the circuit breaker funds for FY 27. It just seems also that I know our if we spend down too much of the free cash, or I prefer to say,
Yeah, and the free cash, yeah, and that's for the entire government. So I think that in light of circumstances, yes, we should put a premium on maintaining a healthy balance there. We have tariffs coming in tomorrow. We don't know what that's gonna mean. I'm sure we're gonna have some sort of an impact, federal government, everything we've talked about already. So
Plus the negotiations with the.
plus the negotiations. So I think it's appropriate. I think it's appropriate to sort of pull on those circuit breaker money now,
Give ourselves.
or at least make a recommendation.
I think this is just guardrails for the town. I mean, we want to support the schools as much as possible in a manner.
But there's
that
more
protects
optionality
the
with
town.
free cash than with this specific one. Any,
Jeff, how
yeah,
you said the historical growth of the income in the town is what?
so the historical growth of the town,
Yeah,
Revenue.
The budget,
Revenue.
the revenue growth,
the revenue growth.
then that could just be around 2.5.
yeah, the adage was, 2.5% plus new growth, but we're even projecting beyond that. So I think we're getting a little bit more aggressive at 3.87% revenue growth. So I would have to pull up what our actuals were. But I know we were operating under 2.5% plus new growth as sort of, that's it.
Yeah, I would like to point out that the education, but just looking at the education budget for the last decade,
Yes,
has gone up an average year over year of 4.79.
4.79.
Yeah, that's the historical increase. And back in January, when we had the budget summit, the town manager assumed a 4.92% increase in the education costs based on average growth for the previous 11 years. So it's kind of curious as to how they were able to have a 4.92% increase.
Yeah, with revenue is,
Revenues
Under
were
four.
only, yeah. So how did we,
yeah, I
how did
think,
we fund them in the past? How did we fund the schools in the past?
Our last override was what,
2019,
2020.
Okay.
I mean,
and now we're on the last
we're on the tail end
gaps
of that.
of it, yeah.
And all the one-offs from the federal government, right? during COVID.
Yeah, that helps too.
Yes.
Yeah, that,
And
and
so
not
one,
having
two,
a
and
20%
three.
increase on health insurance.
Mhm.
And again, I think municipal side, at least this year, is 1.9, 2.9%, so that's growing under revenue growth. 2.9% with the unallocated wages.
Just trying to make sure I understand here,
Yeah.
and then if it's laid out, I'm putting this spreadsheet, but if it's laid out anywhere else. You know, so we're projecting town revenues to grow up 3.87%.
Correct.
So we're proposing 3.87% increase in the school budget. That is still resulting in us putting free cash at risk because last year's budget was also unbalanced.
Last year,
Well,
we-
health insurance is going up 3 million.
health
right?
insurance has gone up 20% this year.
And
So-
that's not part of the 3.8% increase, 3.87% increase we're proposing.
So that is, yeah, so undistributed, the health insurance line is not in the school budget.
Okay.
So that is actually one of the recommendation, maybe a recommendation to distribute the undistributed, so that health insurance is majority schools as well.
Okay,
So, but education budget is not inclusive of health insurance.
that's what, okay, I was confused by if we're restricting them to the same growth as our own town revenues and we're still $1.7 million out, that's because of mostly the undistributed.
So that is, yeah, so
As
health
well as
insurance,
potentially last year not being fully balanced either.
so last year's not an impact, so health insurance, 20% hit, I think it was $3 million, or we have to
Mhm.
look at, and then. Yeah, and then schools at 3.87%, and then I think we have a few other. Let's pull up the expenses.
Water and sewer.
Yeah, a few other items growing at faster than 3.87%.
Got it, okay.
So if you look at that, and think to your question, that percentage also belongs to the school budget, right? Because the employees' health insurance is included in there. So when that rises, if you look at the year end, it's not what we see as the budget that's reported to DESI, it's a bigger number, because then you start to allocate that over.
Hmm.
But on top of that, schools have few more avenues to either be reimbursed or get supplemental money from. So this is
Right.
just trying to. I mean, really, if you look at the motion, you always have to look at it backwards. So we want to cap it at 3.87%, but the first things that we want to do is identify your one-time funding sources, so you're certain.
And I think
Of course, yeah,
it's a
but-
similar rationale we took with the healthcare stabilization funds. Healthcare costs are going up 20%. We have 250,000 sitting in there. This seems like an opportune time to use that. I think it's a similar rationale to the circuit breaker funding. Schools are going up 7%. They're a huge portion of the budget. They have this fund here. It seems like a good year to use it.
Yeah, I'm trying to understand where things are coming in now, because it also
Yeah.
strikes me that and I don't know where we were last year, but if last year we earned $100 in revenue and we spent $102 and everybody gets a 3% increase, now the $2 goes up 3% and now we're owing 2.06 instead of just owing 2.
Yeah.
So if we're doing, I mean, so we're taking account for that, that's potentially, if we're just multiplying
Yeah,
everything,
it's compounding.
Yeah.
compounding the
over the
deficit
year, yeah.
effectively, yeah,
Mhm.
on top of this
Which
undistributed.
is heading to that O word.
Yeah,
Eric, is 8 retirees in the school system, is that a high number, medium number, average number?
7.
I think it's, yeah, well, I think it's 7, but I'm not sure.
I think it's, I'm sorry,
I thought it was 7, but
Yes,
rather they had
That's
made
what they
one.
said.
The write-up says 7. I think he said 7 too.
Oh, okay.
yeah.
I'm not sure. I don't want to speak for that.
Your question is whether that's. an
Is that
average number?
historically high?
I can look into it. I don't know.
hey, well,
And does that reduce our health insurance costs, or I don't know what happens?
yeah, it's a good question. I remember,
That significantly affect our health insurance costs if those.
Neil, when you did the budget with 3 or 4
Uh,
retirements.
It was around 3 or 4, you're right.
Yeah, I remember, yeah,
And this, I was trying to pull the numbers, unless it has, I was trying to remember what 23 was. I mean, certainly last year we were at what, 65, and I don't have FY 24's number. 23's number for total expenditures is $83 million, right? That's well over the number we have. So
Yeah.
that accounts for unallocated costs that go in when it goes into DESI. But yeah, I mean, the retirement numbers is tough in terms of the health insurance side, because if you have an individual coming in to replace a family, that's gonna be lower, but then you have the opposite side, it'll be higher, right? But I don't know the person
Yeah.
who retires, whether it's one person or a family of four. That's
don't know.
very difficult to
Yeah.
calculate what that number is on health insurance side. But unless we're hiring somebody who's about to retire to replace the person who retired, that salary should go down, but at 7 point something, I
Yeah.
don't know what's happening in those numbers. We don't know if that's net. I don't know if I heard whether that's net.
Yeah.
The personal services increase, and then you subtract out whatever the difference is
Yeah.
between your average hire versus someone who retires.
Yeah, that's where I know we talked about it, but again, it would be nice to just question, answer.
Yes.
Whatever we vote on, I'd appreciate if we just re-asked those questions.
But the bottom line, I think someone pointed out, remember, is that this is a bottom line number.
Yep.
Whatever the school decides
That's
is the highest priority to fund is what the school decides to fund. And they can reorganize this whole thing any different way. Everything that's on here, if something changes, it can be different FTEs, fewer, more. With $2.5 million is the decision of the school where they want to fund
Great.
it.
With that, are we prepared to vote?
So one last thing for Eric, the IT cut by half. And is there any story behind that? I mean, I'm not that I'm worried about it, but it went from 11 to 6. I mean, is that?
I didn't ask, even though last year, that was one of my main questions, which is why are we at 11 for IT?
Okay, cool.
It's-
Yeah.
And the list
They
of,
listen to you then.
and a list of questions and concerns, it's much further down.
I'm glad they're getting more efficient. Just maybe we're paying for 2x we needed for a while.
All right,
And Jeff, one more question, Jeff,
go ahead, Jerry.
if we vote this budget, the 3.87, that is still, if I'm looking at the numbers correctly, leaving us with about a $1.5 million deficit. Is that
Yep.
is that what your
So-
numbers show?
It's gonna be about 1.7, backing out the select board's change to
Got
health
it.
insurance.
Got it.
program. Yeah.
Got it. Thanks.
Point out to people, I mean, we're not even funding OPEB this year. We did.
Correct.
One of my concerns.
Yeah, we did, yeah, that was if
300.
John was here, he would be,
Yeah, I'm quite concerned about that because that's something that we promised to fund year over year.
yeah,
And
so
we're
I,
not funding it this year because the deficit is so big. I understand that, but I do have huge concerns.
yeah, I think that's the theme of this year, of what levers can we pull? And pull them now, given the circumstances.
Also, just a little brutal, but I think realistically, if we are going to be in a stronger negotiating position with the unions, funding OPEB is actually not the right thing to do. It's not the moral thing to do, I get it, but nonetheless, from a negotiating perspective, it's probably better to leave a bit of a deficit.
Just to support your point, but I think this motion would also support that statement from Rowan.
Catherine, did you have a point?
No.
All right. All those in favor of Eric's motion regarding the school budget?
Was there a second? Just.
Yeah, if he's had a second. Yep. Do you want to
Well,
raise your
that's easy.
hands?
Looks like I'm, oh,
So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Jerry,
I approve.
9. All those opposed? 2. Richard and Peace. And just curious, the opposition rationale for the sake of debate.
I think we stick to our principles and.
Structurally balanced budget. Yeah.
And I'm on the opposite side. I just think, we should be closer to the historical average of the budget.
Yeah. No,
Closer to
and-
5%.
Yeah, no, I appreciate just the debate. So if you wouldn't mind sending that over with the follow-up questions, and we always have the right to and ability to reopen budgets as we go. So we can conclude our school discussion. All right, and then,
Just to put like a bow on that conversation as
okay.
well, I think, generally speaking, the process needs to get better. We've talked about this 1,000 times. I feel like schools are, to a certain extent, and it's not all their fault, operating in a silo when doing their budget. And I think the biggest microcosm of that is when the town manager's budget was produced, there's a sensitivity analysis in there that kind of outlines conservative, middle, best case scenarios as far as where free cash is going. So on February 15th, the worst case scenario for school growth was assumed to be 6.5%. And then 3 weeks later, there was a 7.15% request. So something's obviously not working, and I hope everybody can do better moving forward.
That's well said.
Well, and so I guess that begs the question too. Now that the school committee has embarked on this new process, is that what's going to happen again next year? How do we address the process question? So that we don't get caught in this position again?
Yeah, I think that is a charter question.
Yeah.
And I think that, it's intended to do the same thing next year. That was what was stated in our
They
meeting.
argued that they weren't violating the terms of the charter.
Yeah.
So they felt it was consistent.
But- And I think if you
I think
read,
that is their intent to keep that.
Yeah.
I
cadence,
think if
so.
you read the charter, it says the budget. So it's one of those debates of, what does the mean? Or is it a budget?
And it's a question of what is the charter state versus the state.
Yeah,
The school budget doesn't mean the school budget, the final school budget?
I'm not making that argument. I'm just saying that it's the argument's going to be, what do those small words mean in practicality? I think the intent of the charter was to have a very linear process of schools deliver 1:30, town manager delivers 2:15, we deliver before town meeting, almost like an assembly row, which I believe we've done for a long time. So, but yeah, I agree. There's a procedure question here of what's appropriate or not. I don't feel like this year was appropriate. I don't think it was the spirit, like I said, or language of the charter. But I do think we need to see what mechanism there is for next year in FY27 to avoid the same situation.
Well, and to
My question
continue-
is more of a procedural question than anything else. How do we do that? How do we raise that flag? To bring it up for.
Yeah, I think that
whatever
might be
parties need to discuss
a
it.
town lawyer question.
I think it's a legal question, but I also think that given that some of the sources of funding for our school systems do come from the state, how that money is handled with respect to how the state wants it to be handled is another important question to ask. Because there are certain terms, statements, guidelines from the state of Massachusetts with respect to the sending out of information and the validating of that information that if you don't oblige by, I would argue the town would face penalties long-term if that was raised. So there's the charter, which I obviously respect, but at the same time, if this town of Winchester might be at risk for whatever reason, because we're not following the guidelines of the state and the federal government, which is where we're getting some of our income from. That balance has to be found, and it's definitely a town legal question, but
Yeah, we should follow up on that. I think we have to execute our function on the FY26 budget, but that is a big question. Just the integrity of the process going forward.
and I would argue, and I will say this, that the process isn't exactly smooth. I assumed that by giving school committee more time to do their work, they would try to bring their budget more in line with what the town manager has presented from her data standpoint. I think the numbers show that we've drifted further apart from that. And on top of that, they didn't clearly present the data to the town. I mean, again, this detailed budget coming up after the vote, after the meeting with us.
Yeah,
Doesn't help the process, and I will continuously push that, because as the person doing the school committee budget, it was very frustrating to want to give school committee more time to do their job, but at the same time, make my job more difficult.
Yeah, and I think we're all in agreement on the process. And I'm tempted to, given we have a broken TV here, I wanted to go over the minutes, but I see not everybody has a laptop in front of them, so go ahead, Rich.
Um, in terms of reviewing things, I think it should also be I'd like to have the per pupil expenditures question addressed.
Yeah, if let's just talk about them now with outstanding questions to include with. So here's the motion that was passed 9-2. And then outstanding questions. Confirmation on the FY 25 per pupil spending. So we agree on that number. Confirmation on number of roles unfunded in FY 25 and associated compensation. Confirmation on exact retirements and total compensation that we saw in FY 25. So those are 3 questions. Anybody have any other questions?
I would like to know what circuit breaker been spent on in the prior years and what's the plan for it in the future? I mean, the details behind it,
So the ins and outs
The
of,
ins and outs.
yeah.
yeah. So yeah, I think that, question 4,
It's the circuit breaker strategy.
circuit breaker, specific usage and strategy. And I know, we're making the recommendation to utilize that money.
Do we also need to ask the question whether in fact that additional program has found a source of funds yet?
Which program?
The literacy initiative, the pilot?
Yeah, I think that's in the motion.
That's in the motion, in my
Yeah.
opinion,
Yeah, so we see,
So
because again, if they don't have the funding, so to speak, they should be asking town meeting. For the money at one time.
yeah, so I think that's
Yeah.
covered in the motion of, seek alternative funding via grants, et
Okay,
cetera.
okay, fine.
The goal there is to not give them a pot of money for new public programs every year. It's to
No,
make
no,
it
I get that.
specific, yeah.
And there's already an article, I know I've said it before, but there's already an article right now, unless it's been pulled, but, for one-time funding.
Yeah.
I'm not sure the details behind it. but
Yeah,
There is an article for that.
Do we know if that's for the literacy program?
It's for professional development.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
there were 2 lines in there. There was the literacy pilot and then professional development for the
Yeah.
people who are running the. pilot.
But to support that statement, there's professional development money
Yeah,
in
and
the budget that you could move to that amendment if you wanted to amend it on the floor to increase it, which I don't think anyone I think the majority of town meeting would support.
Yeah.
and I think those 4 questions are the bigger ones that would be insightful to have as we prepare our budget. I know we have outstanding questions from the write-up that we delivered, and that's fine. But I think we can get answers on those 4, we'd be in a good position.
And not at that priority, but also worthwhile to me is they spent a lot of time last week harping on their multi-year planning process and that they expected to have better projections, or at least to be more organized about what's happening in the future. So I would hope that means less surprises and fewer discrepancies between expectations and what they actually put on the table, if they are actually planning a 3-year, 4-year phase at this point, rather than year by year.
That's a good point.
Because they're simultaneously doing that and saying, oh, but we need until April 1st to actually give you what we're doing, which doesn't quite that well.
I think to your point, the real goal here, in my opinion, is to give them guardrails to keep them in a certain way and to hopefully drive a correct override in a few years. That's inevitable to get back on track. I mean, I don't think you can argue against, we're gonna face an override at this rate. It's gonna be 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, and how much will that be? And if they have a 3 to 5 year plan, the town will be better off for both the teachers, students, administrators, but as well as the assets that these students and teachers are.
That's a decision for the
Yeah.
select board to do.
Yeah.
Not our place.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And
Or
that's-
maybe the school committee's place.
Yeah, our job is FY 26 budget and projections to the best of our ability and take a balance across the town, so. With that. I'm tempted, on Thursday, I have a meeting posted, we have to, I'll look for motions on the municipal side of government. I think there's maybe just small dollars there, but if we want to go through expenses and make some adjustments, we can have that conversation. And then on undistributed, not much for us to really change there, except voting it, so I'd like to have a voted budget. Call it by end of Tuesday of next week, and then I'll have conversation with Stacy and Beth. And I'd love to be able to prepare a budget book starting on Tuesday. As we go, so. And just one last thing, we'll post the minutes, if you can just read the minutes in the box, and then we'll vote them on Thursday. I'm gonna see if,
I mean, there's a few laptops here.
or if we want to just do them now.
Yeah.
Let's do them now.
I think we should just do that.
Clarification on, this is on the town side, it's a new process. Where we're trying to do one number, is that? my
Yeah, so
understanding?
in my eyes, it's like we just adopted consent agenda a few years ago for a small budget. It was almost be basically a large consent agenda and any adjustments we wanted to make. So if taking $5,000 out of the town manager's expense budget, like I talked with Beth, we'd make that motion, pass that, and then vote the entire budget. So we change specific line items, then vote the entire municipal side at a dollar amount.
So you're not looking for any of us to go into detail in the budget, or at all?
It was
Because-
just town clerk, town manager, library, and then I think there are a few other ones if we want to look at expenses.
Yeah, because I was hoping to encourage, just even if you're just looking at it, to look at the budget, because one year. We literally just found a duplicate of $11,000.
Yeah, so why don't we take that of? Yeah, if we vote minutes now, and then we mobilize over the next week to just review all our assigned budgets.
Yeah.
And just do one more comb through to see if there's anything there, and then maybe we don't need Thursday meeting and we can come in Tuesday and spend the whole time and vote the whole budget.
Do we have a revised version of the town managers? Because I know she took out, for example, one of the facilities people. and-
Yeah, so that was already included. I think she was. Yeah, so she already took out that in her February 15th budget.
Oh, it was already out?
Yeah,
Okay,
yeah, I think the question was whether we wanted to put it back in.
I see.
Yeah.
And one other question, are we thinking we want to do any precinct level presentation discussion open this?
Yeah, I think we should, and that's why I want to get a budget so that, we could write it up. And sort of get the punchlines of, yeah, so I'm not sure how that's going to look, but if we can get things done April 8th, our public hearings to April 23rd, so that gives us a couple weeks in the middle there to host some precinct meetings and just message out there sort of here's what we came up with.
So I would suggest that we probably want to get some dates in the books sooner rather than later if we're gonna do that, because there are other groups forming.
Yeah, and I'll take help
Precinct
on that
meetings.
front, so if people have the willingness and ability to help schedule, I will absolutely take you up on that, and if you want to do evens and odds, 2 nights or want to do 4 nights, I can participate at night, but I'll take some help on schedule.
We would
For the precinct
have
members.
different, I don't know what precinct representation we have anymore, but if you happen to wear 2 hats and on FinCom and
Yeah.
town meeting member, it makes it easier to schedule with that precinct.
true.
We used to have a spreadsheet out there that summarizes so that you automatically are responsible for helping coordinate with that precinct. I don't know, we still have that. I
Yeah,
know
that's
Let's go
maybe
around and
change.
see who's on which precinct.
Yeah, who's in precinct 1?
I'm precinct 2.
You're precinct 2? All right, Rich.
And I've been told that they're trying to organize a meeting with Dr. Hackett on the 9th, next Wednesday.
There's one tomorrow too.
And there's one tomorrow for 4, 5, and 6.
Yeah, and
And 8 had one last Saturday. And actually, the notes from that are on the
Tomorrow.
There.
At BO 6:30.
yeah, and I think the objective with these meetings is delivery of information and rationale. Like we ran our process, here's what we came up, we think this recommended budget's the best interest of Winchester. I don't want to get into siloed debates and trying to counter each other. I just don't think that's appropriate for our function. So who's in precinct 3? Please. 4? Eric,
Looking forward to it.
you in 5? Catherine. 6,
6.
Patrick. So no P1. And we have a set.
You're gonna do dates?
Yeah.
Gene.
It's right across the street. No, that's where it was. Yeah, it's like the line of demarcation.
John, I guess it's the same.
It's like one block the other way.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Jeremy's the same as me, it's 3.
Who's in 3?
Jeremy.
Jeremy,
I don't think we have
I'm 2.
you 2?
anybody in 7 or 8. Oh, you're in
I
seven.
raised my hand.
She's in. Anybody, so 1 and 8 were light?
Sounds like it.
I'm not even a town meeting member, but I am from precinct 8,
You from 8?
if you need me to do anything.
That's great. I'll coordinate, right?
Yeah, and it's,
I can coordinate if they, like, yeah.
yeah, if you,
But are we having them separately or grouped? Because it sounds like some of the other ones are grouped.
Actually, if we could do them together, that would.
It
make a lot
maybe
more
it's
sense.
easier.
Yeah.
Like,
yeah,
I'm
just,
not sure it's necessary to do one per precinct.
or if we do. If it went, a few years ago, we did evens and odds, so split it up in 1 week. And just to make it a little bit more, first of all, not open meetings, so we're not all there and like we just split up and divide precincts, so I'm tempted to just, if we want to do evens and odds. And schedule one for each. For the week, so that would put us. 7th, so the week of the 14th. If we wanted to take. Tuesday, Thursdays, or, yeah, April 14th, that week. Because that would be the lead up into our public hearing. On the 23rd, so,
So you want to do one day for precinct 1357?
yeah, 1357, and then 2468.
Okay,
So the 15th would be all the odd precincts?
Yeah, if we took our existing meeting times, things might come up that we have to discuss, so I don't want to. Utilize that time, so if we want to take that. Monday, Wednesday, just to be conservative, so Monday, the 14th, and then Wednesday, the 16th.
yeah, that might be better because that weekend is Easter break.
Got it.
Might be
Yeah.
clashing with the holidays.
All right, so
Yeah.
let's
That's
do
the following week
Oh,
is
okay.
school
The
vacation.
schools are out the following week.
the following, yeah. So let's do April 14th, 1357. And then April 16th, 2468. And then who wants to help coordinate 1537? Please, thank you. And then 2468.
I can help with that.
And we want to just go for the evening of Monday?
Yeah, I think if we can get the room upstairs with the projector. We can get that to work. When it's not the select board, it's on the main level. That's was it auditorium or
Upstairs,
Oh,
the
Winchester.
room, I think.
the
That's the
Winchester
Winchester
room?
room, the big
Yeah,
one.
yeah, the big one,
The 14th and what was the other?
the
date?
16th,
16th.
And who
The
handles
one that's
the
always
schedule?
called.
Town clerk's
town
office.
clerk office, yeah.
What time?
Town clerk office?
Yeah, it depends, like. What do people think? I think we did 6 to 7:30 or 6 to 8 last time. I don't know if we have to do, 7:30 to 9:30. So,
Yeah, usually after an hour, there weren't that many questions.
yeah,
6:30 next.
6:30 to 7:30.
Yeah, I think that's
To
better.
give people some time for dinner and.
Dinner and get back home before the kids needs to go to.
So we can-
All right, thank you.
I'm not sure.
Yeah, we can go through materials of, I think it is, hopefully we'll have the voted budget by then and process and how we work through.
So how do we want to promote these? On a residence page, what
But
else?
I'm happy. to-
Yeah, I think residence page, I think once they're booked, so we'll get confirmation.
I think it's the district will be the one that communicates.
Yeah,
Which tends to post a lot of stuff there.
yeah, TMMA,
That's
we can do,
Winchester
Is there a direct email to everyone?
and I'll send a direct email to just all town managers, I just,
You could send that out to all precinct members, town meeting members,
Yeah.
just inviting them to invite their constituents.
yeah, and that's, I'll send an email, I think we do TMMA. Be vocal ourselves, and then I'll send an email out once they're booked and we have confirmation 6:30, 7:30 that we're hosting. Off it, just meet and greets, basically. On Monday and Wednesday,
But this is just for town meeting members, right?
just for town meeting members.
Individual residents, I think that'll be for the public session that comes in the week of the 23rd, right? Or do you want to let it mix? I don't care.
No, I think this is town meeting member specific.
I would prefer it's town meeting member
Yeah.
specific
Makes sense.
based on the language of the motion.
Yeah, so this is a town meeting member specific meet and greet to discuss.
It would open time for town meeting members to ask questions and stuff.
Yeah,
like that.
and there's nothing to preclude people. It's like, hey, I could make it on Wednesday, fine, but we're trying to just stick to that.
We didn't get more than a handful of people to pass. I don't know how it was. Get more. last year.
When, like 10, 12
Yeah, it's about.
a night, yeah. But, just more than zero, so it's always, yeah, good to communicate.
If you need more people, then you have to send an incendiary message through the newspaper. And then they will be interested.
We could offer food.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We have a budget.
Well,
We got, we have our,
Oh.
we have our massive $3,000 budget. A lot of Dunkin' Donuts.
This year, so.
Yeah.
I'm not sending the
We'll
paper.
get at least another dozen in, I'm sure.
Yeah, and I would say if, we do have to be conscious of open meeting laws, but if 4, 7, 6 of us want to go in these meetings just to help, feel free, but we
No more
can't,
than 7.
can't trip over 8.
Catch up.
Yeah, no more than 7, correct.
And I encourage everybody to take a look at the TMMA discussion boards.
Yeah. I saw
On
it,
there. Carol Savage is on there.
I've seen it, mature over the past couple of years, when you go to the UI, everything's separated out, so it seems like a lot of good work's gone into
Rich
it.
is a pretty frequent contributor.
Yeah.
So if you're a town meeting member, you should have a login. And you can
Great.
reply to messages, even if you're not a town meeting member, just a member of the general public. You can still read the messages, you just can't reply.
Okay.
But then you can always
Sheehan,
email.
FaceTime video.
There we go. Jerry, we got you on. I think we're good. Me, Lynn, and then before we run out of steam, we'll do minutes.
Just wanted to ask, used to be people would come and just ask questions, whether, and I don't know how many we could handle, we can just pick a few. Allow people to submit questions in advance of the meeting so that we can answer some questions that may not come up.
Yeah.
In these meetings. I know when I did them, there were people who came to me with questions later, but it would be nice to have, because then you had multiple questions that are similar coming at you, but it's nice to just answer them.
Yeah, maybe we
with
can
town
do,
meeting.
maybe we can do a. Once everything's booked, if I can spin up an easy Google form. And if I'm going to notify all town meeting members, hey, we're gonna do this. Just here's a free text box. If you want to just write any, questions, whatever you want. It's a good idea. All right. Minutes. Let's go back. Minutes. Yeah, so March 25th. So we did, yeah, I'll go through them. So Jerry was not here, John was not here, Jean and Luna not here. We had schools, public comment. Thanks, sure we got Nora's,
Yeah.
correct.
Nora's name still correct me?
Yeah.
Yes, awesome.
So did we not have a Thursday meeting last Thursday?
So is that,
We did?
We did, yeah.
Yeah.
Because then I was here on Tuesday,
you were here on Tuesday?
yes. I only missed one meeting. So I think.
John was on it.
Yeah, so we're on the 25th. So
I'm not sure.
Yeah,
Nora
I was
actually-
here.
I think the first line maybe isn't accurate. I don't know if she discussed the deficit not being sustainable as more as she was saying we should be funding the schools. I think that was her primary argument.
Yeah.
I would just start with the second sentence.
Yeah,
Was John here last week?
no,
No.
John and Jean were not here.
Yeah.
yeah, that's what it
says.
That was
just
it.
Members. Oh, sorry, Spencer, I'm gonna go out.
Yeah,
But I
good
will-
call out,
I'll
please.
step in.
But you were here.
Yes.
If there's free cash needs to be here, or match. So then we approve the minutes. Then we had our discussion. $2 million. So that's the cherry sheets.
Yeah.
I might just shorten that whole public comment thing and just make it one sentence. She urged FinCom to use free cash to meet school needs this year. That's basically her
Yeah,
argument. I don't think
yeah.
we need the rest of it, do we?
Yeah.
The rest was correct, but you have to quote it, otherwise it just look.
Like that. Yeah,
Yeah, see what you're doing.
FinCom to use free cash to meet the needs of the school for FY 26.
Refresh and then go.
Takeaways from our discussion with schools. What was the other? Was it Dibbles? What was the other test? It was MCAS and
That Frank was talking about, yeah, Dibbles.
all right, any,
The bullet point number 4, maybe I'm not reading it correct. What does that mean? Discuss how there are problems more so with the.
I think that was related to me asking about
So-
whether there had been any turnover. in
turnover,
staff.
yeah,
He said, because I was sort of challenging that, the idea why we needed to increase compensation. And he said, well, there hadn't really been any turnover in staff, it was more of a recruiting issue. To me, that makes still no sense, but anyway,
Yeah,
if people
there-
are leaving, then there's no issue with compensation.
And he spoke about how there were some positions open from 2023 that
Right.
still had not been filled.
That was sort of the reason why he mentioned that.
yeah.
Right,
So it's, the punchline is, no turnover due to compensation that was seen, but the issue is filling roles.
as long as that makes sense, the sentence makes sense to you. The majority. Do we want to be more specific about the next bullet points is the process this year? Do you want to specify
So which,
the next bullet points, the process this year?
yeah, I, no problem. This,
In the moment, I have to take that up, but again, as projected. Or as foreseen. Don't mention
yeah, I changed those two bullets, they just get the punchlines, because, yeah, I mentioned that we deviated from
Yeah.
the charter and asked if we're gonna do the same. All right,
You want to change the statement about enrollment, Jeff?
yeah, I did.
This might be something.
Yeah, if everybody refreshes. And then I would,
Sorry, it's not letting me do that.
are you refreshed?
It's real, if you open
Oh,
it. in
real
Word,
time?
it's real
There you
time.
go. So I'll, if we're comfortable, I'll take a motion on these minutes.
Motion to approve the minutes from March 25th.
Second.
Second,
Numerous seconds, all those in favor? Unanimous. Okay. And then I'm on March 27th. So we had everybody except Jerry, Derek, John,
No, Jerry, John, and Jean.
everybody except,
Or something.
yeah, Jerry, Derek, John, Jean, and Luna.
Correct.
No public comment. Okay, then we started our discussion. I'm glad we waited till today. I think we had a good conversation on schools. Yeah, we did all our articles, so that's on page 2. Or motions, I'm sorry. And
I
that,
think in that first paragraph, the detailed budget is still not up online, and we're talking schools budget, right?
the detailed budget is still not online. Was that?
So you want to call out specifically that the detailed budget for schools is still.
No,
not
yeah.
done.
Yeah, it's a good point.
Someone seconded, and then you do this.
At the end of the meeting, yeah, we had a discussion.
Okay.
All right, then we voted all our items. And that looks copy and paste.
Eric, what did you mean by the last sentence in the first paragraph? I'm not sure. The budget problem is financially related.
Where's?
That seems sort of
That's what I'm trying to figure out what I.
same.
It's
not wrong.
It is.
We're saying that you are not trying to tell them how to run their business, but you're trying to just look at it from the financial perspective.
Discuss the meeting with schools being.
I just try not to laugh as I read it.
You take it out if you can't remember. Don't know that.
That's hard.
Well, I think what it's trying to say is that our constraint on the financial problem is limited by the dollar. I mean.
The money is
The money,
financial.
the money is money and the money is financial. It's
Correct.
limited and it's free ability to be spent. I would. I think. that's-
And I don't know what that means.
I think
So I'll,
That rabbit hole again.
I just
There we
don't
go.
like that.
so we discussed it being informative. And that new growth, yeah.
You weren't quite yourself last week.
You just got off a plane.
That was
When
the,
you came in.
What you said, but.
Post, thank you for saying. That.
I'm gonna be saying that the budget problems are financial. Just start there. Drop the
Whoa.
All right. So I think this is pretty good if I scroll all the way down. And the one call out was the 130 actually for the cap for the Board of Health. That is our adjusted dollar amount. So that is what we voted last year. So we confirm that. So I will take a motion.
Motion to approve, meeting minutes for March 27th.
Second.
Oh, excuse me, I wasn't here.
20
I
Oh, yeah,
couldn't do
you
that.
can't make a motion.
Sorry, I
Right.
forgot.
Not second.
All right.
Motion to approve the minutes for March 27th, 2025.
Second, numerous, all those in favor?
I abstained, I wasn't here.
Great, so unanimous then. 2 abstentions. All right, so I will cancel our meeting on Thursday. We're caught up on minutes and I'll send out just a one-way email to say all our budget assignments, if you can just comb through the municipal side. And then we'll come in on Tuesday and plan on voting the rest of the budget. And then we can work on the 3-year plan, the projections afterwards, but I'd like to have a budget on Tuesday.
Okay.
All right.
Motion to adjourn.
Second,
Second.
all right, all those in favor, here we go,
Aye.
thank you.
Yeah.
Right.
Eric, did you have your son right?
Friday.